United Nations reveals death of 441 civilians in the first 41 days of Russia's war in Ukraine. My name is Femi Olanikwekun. Now the news in detail. Nurses in the United Kingdom have staged an unprecedented one-day strike as a last resort in their fight for better wages and working conditions. Up to 100,000 members of the Royal College of Nursing, RCN, in England, Wales and Northern Ireland are stopping work from 8 a.m. to 8 p.m. today after rejecting a government pay offer. The RCN wants a 19% pay rise, but the government says the demand is unaffordable and that it has met independent recommendations on pay. The RCN's industrial action is part of a growing wave of stoppages by public and private sector employees. The staff will provide life-preserving and some urgent care, but routine services are likely to be disrupted in the biggest ever walkout by NHS nurses. Picket lines were set up at leading state-run hospitals, including Guy's and St. Thomas NHS Foundation Trust in London. The strike is the first in RCN Union's 106-year history, and a walkout will also take place on the 20th of December.
My pay has been eroded by 20% in the last 10 years because of below inflation pay rises. But for nurses to take strike action, there has to be more. And I'll tell you what the more is. We cannot deliver patient safety anymore guaranteed. We've got 47,000 vacancies of nurses in England's NHS alone. And it means when I go to work and when my colleagues go to work, we're carrying those vacancies on our back. We can't guarantee that the job is as safe as it should be. And I think what we need is we need a pay rise, not just for money in our pockets, but to retain staff, to keep staff in the NHS. In fact, we need a pay rise to save the NHS.
In the meantime, the GMB union, which represents NHS ambulance staff, nurses, porters and radiographers, has voted to reject an improved pay deal from the Scottish government. It said 66% of their members voted to reject the improved offer, which would have seen workers receive average 7.5% pay uplift. The GMB suspended a planned 26-hour ambulance strike last month and put the new offer to members in a vote. And while Labour lawmaker for Hemsworth, John Trickett, today declared his support for nurses in the House of Commons, saying it is time to stand by them.
Closest members of my family were gravely ill for weeks in Yorkshire hospitals, and I myself had an accident, almost lost use of my leg, which was then recovered thanks to the skill of the staff. The nurses looked after all three of us, and they do for tens of thousands of other patients every day. They don't ask for anything except that we leave that hospital better than when we came in. They stand by us. It's time that we stood by them. Now, the leader, no doubt, believes she's an extremely persuasive person, and no doubt she is. Can she not, over the weekend, persuade the Prime Minister to make a statement on Monday or Tuesday? There's another action on Tuesday where he says he will resolve the nurses' case to their satisfaction so we can have a Christmas where the NHS begins to rebuild itself.
In the United States, President Joe Biden has announced billions of dollars in new funding for Africa at a summit of dozens of heads of state in Washington. Mr. Biden told the over 40 African leaders attending the summit that the United States dedicated to Africa's future. He was also optimistic about improved links with Africa during a summit in which he announced $55 billion in new funding for the continent over the next 3 years, which included $100 million for clean energy project. Mr. Biden spoke of the importance of good governance, healthy populations, and affordable energy. The summit of heads of state is seen as an attempt by America to reassert its influence in Africa at a time when China, Russia, and Turkey are deepening their involvement. It is the first such gathering hosted by Washington for 8 years.
We've made it clear there isn't anybody going to come from anywhere.
These MCC investments are part of the work we're doing worldwide through the Partnership for Global Infrastructure and Investment. I propose this initiative together with the rest of the G7 to help fill the need for quality, high-standard infrastructure in Africa and in low-income and middle-income countries around the world. And at the G7 meeting earlier this year, we announced our intention to collectively mobilize $600 billion in the next 5 years. Today's announcement join a portfolio of Partnership for Global Infrastructure and Investment projects already underway in Africa, including mobilizing $8 billion in public and private finance to help South Africa replace coal-fired power plants with renewable energy sources and develop cutting-edge energy solutions like clean hydrogen. A deal worth $2 billion to build solar energy projects in Angola. $600 million in high-speed communications cable that will connect Southeast Asia to Europe via Egypt and the Horn of Africa and help bring high-speed internet connectivity to countries all along the way. The bottom line is simple. Trade runs on reliable infrastructure to support and secure resilient supply chains. And improving Africa's infrastructure is essential to our vision of building a stronger global economy that can better withstand the kinds of shocks that we've seen in the past few years. Third, we're continuing to support innovation and entrepreneurship across Africa, investing in Africa's people. Developing human capital alongside physical infrastructure is another core aspect of the Partnership for Global Infrastructure and Investment.
Rwandan President Paul Kagame has said nobody is going to bully his country when it comes to internal Rwandan affairs in response to the United States' request to release government critic Paul Rusesabagina. During a discussion on African issues on the sidelines of the U.S.-Africa Summit in Washington, Mr. Kagame was asked if the U.S. Antony Blinken advocacy on Mr. Rusesabagina was helping or hurting his case. Mr. Kagame responded that if Mr. Rusesabagina is set free, how about the other 20 people who pointed to him as being their leader? Last year, Mr. Rusesabagina and 20 other people were found guilty on terrorism charges. The 68-year-old was depicted as a hero in a Hollywood movie on the Rwandan genocide.
We've made it clear there isn't anybody going to come from anywhere to bully us into something to do with our lives, and we accept it. We can't just make one person so important that they want to be held accountable. And by the way, this is even when the person we are talking about himself provided evidence against himself by saying what he said, and that is on camera, that can't be disputed. And the responsibility of deaths of people, of Rwandans, if anyone thinks it can just be wished away because of some things, well, we'll see how to deal with that.
And staying with the U.S.-Africa Summit, the Democratic Republic of Congo's President Felix Tshisekedi has asked U.S. President Joe Biden to put pressure on Rwanda in order to stop its support to the M23 rebels. The two presidents spoke at a bilateral meeting during the ongoing U.S.-Africa Summit in Washington. The U.S. has previously called on Rwanda to stop its support to the M23, while Kigali has continuously denied links with the rebels. It came as the M23 rebels held their first press conference in Bunagana town in eastern DR Congo, which they have controlled since June. They denied killings in Kisheshe and Bambo. United Nations forces in DR Congo has said more than 130 people were killed by the rebels in the two areas on the 29th and 30th of November. Elsewhere, United Nations Rights Chief Volker Turk has said 441 civilians were killed in the first 41 days of Russia's war in Ukraine. Speaking before the UN Human Rights Council, Mr. Turk said his office had documented the summary executions and direct killings of hundreds of civilians across 3 regions of Ukraine from when Russia's full-scale invasion began on February 24th until April 6th. Presenting a report by his office, he said the direct killings of 341 men, 72 women, 20 boys, and 8 girls had been documented in 102 villages and towns across the Kyiv, Chernihiv, and Sumy regions. According to Mr. Turk, there are strong indications that the summary executions documented in the report may constitute the war crime of willful killing.
The findings are based on information gathered during field visits to the 3 regions following the retreat of Russian troops, interviews with witnesses and survivors, and other sources of information. We documented the killings of 441 civilians, 341 men, 72 women, 20 boys, and 8 girls. The actual figures are likely to be considerably higher, as we're working to corroborate an additional 198 alleged killings in these regions. We are also documenting new cases in parts of Kharkiv and Kherson regions that were recently retaken by Ukrainian forces. 100 of the documented killings in the 3 regions are presented in the report in detail.
European Union member states have disagreed on the 9th package of Russian sanctions in talks late yesterday. Diplomats said despite countries moving closer to a deal during negotiations, Poland and some other countries still have objections. The new sanctions have been held up by disagreement over whether the EU should make it easier for Russian fertilizer exports to pass through European ports, even if blacklisted oligarchs own the fertilizer companies. Some say EU restrictions pose a food security threat to developing countries. EU members will meet today for their last summit of the year. Ireland's defense minister says an Irish soldier on the United Nations peacekeeping mission in Lebanon has been shot and killed, and a second is in critical condition after a hostile crowd surrounded their armored vehicle. Simon Coveney, who is also Ireland's foreign minister, said the soldiers were part of the UN interim forces in Lebanon. He said the 2 armored vehicles effectively got separated. One of them got surrounded by a hostile mob and shots were fired. Irish Defence Forces Chief of Staff Shane Clancy said the convoy carrying 8 personnel was traveling to Beirut as 2 of the members were returning to Ireland on compassionate leave following the death of family members. The 2 other soldiers in the vehicle are being treated for minor injuries, while the remaining 4 personnel from the other vehicle were not injured. UNIFIL said it was coordinating with the Lebanese armed forces and had launched an investigation. You are watching Spring Global and Western Spring Television. We'll be right back after this break.
Culture on its own. It has its own language, its own people, with their own way of life. The world of sports is never void of actions, stories, dramas, and scandals. I guess you need a sports show that can walk the walk and talk the talk.
On this show, we answer all your sporting questions. The whens, the whys, the wheres, and even the what ifs. Sports Spring is that show that will give you that new lease of life you've been looking for in sport journalism. Join me, Joseph Atewe,
And your sports Amazon, Nengi Ernest.
on this station, Western Spring Television, channel 190, only on Star Times.
Let's talk sports. Let's speak the most universal language of the world.
Arrested, affected, sound, found. What do we see? What do we say? Flowing from a spring. A fact A to Z. Check and confirm. Ever expounding current events. Traveling down from the business gist to the globally arising happenings, to the sports news, to the bittersweet infos. Guided transmission, even diffusion, vast and fast. Detailed facts are fled. Within seconds, nuggets of words that flew across borders are fired. Stories short and long, wrapped in bundles of words, broken and dissected as it is, except misheard. This is the news as it is.
Thank you so much for staying with us on Spring Global. Rescue workers have found 11 more bodies of people killed following floods on Tuesday night in the capital of the Democratic Republic of Congo, Kinshasa. The bodies were found in the northern Montingafula district of the city, where many houses are built on hillside areas that suffered landslides. The floods have been termed the worst in years witnessed in the city. Nearly 30,000 households have been affected, with 280 homes swept away by the landslides. President Felix Tshisekedi is due to return to the country today from Washington after shortening his participation at the USA-Africa Summit. The official death toll is 120, but non-governmental groups say more than 140 people died. At least 3 people have died as a powerful winter storm moves east across the United States, causing tornadoes in southern states and coating others in snow. A young boy and his mother were killed in Louisiana when their home was destroyed by a tornado. The huge storm also brought blizzard-like conditions to the Midwest, with roads and schools closed and some areas reporting 4 feet of snow. Around 3,300 flights have been delayed and over 150 more cancelled. Thailand's royal palace says the king's eldest daughter collapsed from a heart condition yesterday evening. The palace said Princess Bajakitiaba, the eldest daughter of King Vajiralongkorn, collapsed while training her dogs northeast of Bangkok. The 44-year-old was taken to a nearby hospital and taken by helicopter to Bangkok, where she's been treated. The palace described her condition as stable to a certain extent. In business, Nigeria's newly redesigned Naira notes went into circulation today, with deposit money banks releasing the bills to their customers via the over-the-counter payment. These came about 3 weeks after President Muhammadu Buhari unveiled the new bills at a weekly Federal Executive Council meeting in Abuja, the nation's capital. The president unveiled the redesigned notes across 200 Naira, 500 Naira, and 1,000 Naira denominations. The governor, Central Bank of Nigeria, Godwin Emefiele, had in October announced that Apex Bank would release redesigned Naira notes by December 15, 2022. It also disclosed that the old notes would cease to be regarded as legal tender by January 31, 2023. The CBN boss said it was worrisome that 85% of the total currency in circulation was being hoarded by Nigerians. And Ghana's annual inflation rate increased to 50.3% in November, up from 40.4% in the previous month. According to the latest figures by the Ghana Statistical Service, this is the highest inflation recorded in more than 2 decades. It is attributed to a sharp rise in the cost of housing, water, electricity, gas, and other fuels, which recorded an inflation rate of 79%. On Tuesday, Ghana reached an initial agreement with the IMF for a $3 billion bailout, subject to approval by the Funds Board if the country meets all the requirements. The deal is expected to help restore Ghana's economic stability and ensure debt sustainability. However, the government has to restructure the country's debt to sustainable levels to qualify for the loan. Elon Musk has cashed in another $3.6 billion of Tesla stock as the billionaire technology executive faces mounting interest payments and the prospect of a painful recession. A Securities and Exchange Commission filing revealed that the Tesla, SpaceX, and Twitter CEO sold about 22 million shares over the first 3 days of this week at prices ranging from $155 to $177. The disposals reduced his Tesla stake to 424 million shares, or about 13.4% of the electric vehicle company. Tesla's stock price skyrocketed during the pandemic to over $400 by November 2021, but has more than halved since then to around $157 as of yesterday's close. Its market capitalization has dropped from $1.2 trillion at its peak to below $500 billion today. Some sports stories. A 14-year-old boy has been run over and killed in the southern French city of Montpellier shortly after France's World Cup semi-final victory over Morocco. Authorities said he was struck by a car after the match and then died in hospital. Images on social media showed a car covered in French colors, surrounded by people who then grabbed the flag. The driver then appeared to panic, accelerating into two teenagers. As he turned his car around and sped off, the 14-year-old was hit and went into cardiac arrest. Mayor Michael de la Fosse said everyone was appalled and in shock at the terrible tragedy and wished that perpetrators of the cowardly act were brought to justice. Morocco head coach Walid Regragui has praised his side's performance at the 2022 FIFA World Cup in Qatar. The Atlas Lions lost 2-0 to holders France in a semi-final at the Al Bayt Stadium yesterday night. The North Africans topped their group and then beat Spain and Portugal in the knockout rounds. Regragui insisted that the loss to France does not take away from everything they did to get to the semi-finals, and showed they are not far from the top levels of world football. He also says he will be backing France of Argentina in Sunday's Qatar 2022 World Cup final. And still talking sport, Arsenal defender Pablo Mari has returned to training with his loan club Monza 2 months after being stabbed in an Italian supermarket. The 29-year-old had surgery to reconstruct 2 injured muscles in his back at Milan's Inaguada Hospital. Following the stabbing, Mari would join Arsenal from Brazilian side Flamengo in January 2020, that he felt lucky to have escaped life-threatening injuries. Mari played 19 times for the Gunners before joining Udinese on loan at the start of the year. He was then loaned to newly promoted Monza in August. And in entertainment, Meghan Markle has spoken about how she considered taking her own life before stepping back from the British royal family. In the latest episodes of her Netflix docuseries, Ms. Markle spoke about the pressures of press intrusion and life in the royal family. After his wife had confided in him about her struggles, Prince Harry said he had been devastated. The final 3 episodes of the 6-part series entitled Harry and Meghan were released today.
You are making people want to kill me. It's not just a tabloid. It's not just some story. You are making me scared, right? And like that night, to be up and down in the middle of the night, looking down my hallway, like, are we safe? Are the doors locked? Is security on? Is everything? That's real. Are my babies safe? And you've created it for what? Because you're bored, or because it sells your papers? Or it makes you feel better about your own life? It's real what you're doing. And that's the piece I don't think people fully understand.
Before we end Spring Global, here is a recap of our top stories. Nurses in the United Kingdom have staged an unprecedented one-day strike as a last resort in their fight for better wages and working conditions. United States President Joe Biden has announced billions of dollars in new funding for Africa at a summit of dozens of heads of state in Washington. The United Nations Right Chief Volker Turk has said 441 civilians were killed in the first 41 days of Russia's war in Ukraine. Don't forget to follow us on our social media handles on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter at Western Spring Television. You can also watch us live on our YouTube channel at Western Spring Television. My name is Femi Olanikpekun. Good evening.
Turn it up! It's the Wild Wild West, and Western Spring Television is pulling out all the stops to make sure that you don't miss out on